Hi, welcome to the Shepherd's Rest Dog Talk. This is episode 86B.
I'm Cam and this is Julie.
Yes, this is the Haftarah discussion of this week's Torah portion, and we're in Ezekiel 43, 10 through 27, and it's all about the Millennial Temple, which is why it goes along with the Torah portion for this week, because it is about Ezekiel getting the blueprints from the Lord to build the Millennial Temple. Of course, Ezekiel's not building it, but he gets the blueprints to share with Israel.
Just like Moses was.
Just like Israel to share with the people. Exactly. Okay, so just a quick little recap. Remember so going on the destruction of the temple in Jeremiah's time, that was 586 BC, but 11 years prior is when Jehoiakim was taken captive and deported, and that's when Ezekiel went, and he was on the banks of the river. All right, I found it. It was on the banks of the river Chebar, right? And it was in a town called Tel Aviv. Isn't that funny? Because he's getting the eventual millennial plans, and Tel Aviv was listen, like I'm from Israel.
Yes.
It was Israel's first settled city, I believe.
Yeah, for the second establishment of the nation. Yes.
So after they were exiled in Tel Aviv for 5 years.
Sounds weird.
I know, right? The Lord began to the Lord visited Ezekiel, and that's when he called him to prophesy. That's when he commissioned him to be a prophet. Okay. And the first 24 chapters, if you remember, we talked about this before, are prophesying about the coming destruction of the southern kingdom of Judah and Jerusalem, of what's coming. But then after it was conquered, and after Nebuchadnezzar brought everybody, everybody left, because you either went to Egypt or you came, you went to Babylon.
For me or against me.
Right. So everyone went to Babylon, and after that, then when everyone was there, he began to console them with prophecies of a futuristic reestablishment of everything. The Davidic kingdom, or kingship, the restoration of not only the southern kingdom, but the northern kingdom as well. All of Israel, the resurrection of the dead.
He's giving them hope.
Yes, and now
after chastising.
But it goes way beyond just it goes way beyond the people who were there. It goes for your future generations. All the way, Ezekiel goes all the way to the end.
Right.
I love that about Ezekiel. All right, so we are picking up in 43 where he's, like I said, given the blueprints for the temple.
Hey, I have something cool to say about northern and southern kingdom before you go further.
Sure, yes.
It does go with this week's.
Okay.
So, as we know in the Torah portion in Exodus, we have the breastplate, right? And it has 12, so it has one of each of the tribes.
Right. 12 tribes.
So it shows them separated, but in one piece. So it's Israel. But you also have two of the shoulder pads. Northern and Southern Kingdom was suggested. But what's really cool is they are attached by gold. We talked about that last week about the gold.
Yeshua. In his deity form. So his death, burial, and resurrection was the only way to bring them all back to one.
And it has to stay together to make it one. Even though they're separate, it goes as one. And the shoulder stones are Shechem, Shoham, however you say that. But get this, that is the stone of Joseph.
Oh, of course.
Joseph is, the servant.
Yes.
So on the stones, the servant.
What's the other one?
They're both. Both these stones are Joseph's stones.
Oh, okay.
But what's interesting about that is
the servant becomes deity and makes one.
Yes.
I get it.
Isn't that cool?
Yes,
and
that's so cool.
That we can't handle our own pressure, or we can't handle it.
It's like him taking
his
beam of the cross to the one that was already established
as
and being nailed to it. As Joseph.
The servant. I just thought that was so cool.
That is cool.
And I forgot to say that, but when she said Northern and Southern Kingdom, I'm like, opportunity.
Yes. That was a great opportunity. Yeah. Went well. All right, so we're going to pick up in 10, and I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on 10 through 12.
Okay.
All right, so let me read it first. It says, Son of man, explain the house, meaning the temple, explain the house to the house of Israel. So it's not to the southern kingdom, to the whole house of Israel. And when they are ashamed of their crookedness, they shall measure the measurements. And since they shall be ashamed of all that they did, make known to them the design of the house and its structure and its exits and its entrances, its entire design and all its laws, and all of its forms and all its Torah, and write it down before their eyes, so they observe its entire design and its laws, and shall do them. This is the Torah of the house, upon the mountaintop, all the boundaries of it, all around, and all around is most set apart. See, this is the Torah of the house. All right, so I want to say this. This is kind of cool. I heard this, or I read this story. It's kind of a midrash about a prince. The prince is misbehaving, and he gets exiled out of the country, out of the kingdom. So the king and the queen, the king just longs to have his son back. So the way he entices him is he builds this lavish palace, and then he sends his servants to show it to them and says, all of this is yours if you will just behave yourself. That's exactly what he's telling Ezekiel here.
Right, yeah.
He's saying, look, you guys, the reason you're in this predicament is because
you won't behave.
You won't behave. Yes, but now that they're all there, now that they realize, see, here's the thing.
It says when they're ashamed.
When they're ashamed, that's the key. We can't be shown things of the future. We can't be shown a lot of the prophetic foreshadows until we have a contrite heart, until we are right before the Lord and we humble ourselves. Then He can show us these things.
And wouldn't that have to do with drawing near? Because until we have that type of heart, we can't draw near.
Right.
So why is He going to show us something from afar off? All we're going to do is twist it.
Right. That is so true. And we learned with the tabernacle last week is that at the heart of it is Torah.
Right.
So anything that we're going to draw near to, the heart of it has to be Torah,
right.
Which is why Paul goes into such detail about it's written on our hearts.
Right.
Because when that is written on our hearts, when Torah is the center of our life, then He can show us these things.
Right.
So when people say, I don't understand any of the Bible, none of the Bible makes sense. That's why the Torah is not the center. The veil hasn't been removed, and the Torah is not the center. Right. So that's a little diversion, but I think it's important to note that out, because this goes on and on to say, show them the Torah of the house, the Torah of the house. The funny thing is, what's at the heart of the house?
The Torah.
It's in the ark.
Yeah.
Hello. The Torah is the center. Exactly. Right. Okay, so I wanted to say this. I have an autistic daughter, and her name is Alyssa. And when years ago, she was probably severe to moderately autistic, and we had to do what's called ABA. Mm-hmm. And what ABA is it's positive reinforcement, okay? And the reason we had to do that is because when you have a child that doesn't have a desire to please you, there's no incentive to learn or to do anything that you're supposed to do. Your kids, when they're growing up, have such a love for you and a desire to please you that is what motivates them to do what's right. And that's all the motivation that they need. When they don't have that desire, you have to teach that desire to them. And it is possible, because now she really does have a desire to please her parents and her teachers and her friends and people around her. But it had to be taught. And the way it was taught by enticing her with things that she loved. And I thought about that with our relationship with the Lord. Yeah. Sometimes when we're so far off, instead of the Lord just saying, you know what, I'm just writing them off, forget it, I'll just start over with someone else. He entices us with the things that we love. Yeah. But once we learn to love Him back, that is enough to keep us on the right track.
Right.
Before, it's like, I don't know why my car keeps breaking down, or I don't know why, I tied this week and now I got this. We start to see those little positive reinforcements. But the way it worked with Alyssa was every single time she did something correct, she got a reward. But then the way you teach them to not only work for that is you start to wean those off. Right. And you start changing the rewards from tangible things to intangible things, like going somewhere or the things that she would have to wait a little longer for. So I don't know, I just thought that would be encouraging, because sometimes we feel like He's nowhere to be found because we're walking it out, we're doing what we're supposed to do, and we're not seeing the results. And sometimes, like in this case with the people in Babylon, it's a futuristic thing and it's for the kids. But it still gave them hope to the point where they ended up coming back 70 years later, building a temple. But they knew that it wasn't time for this temple to be built. That's why they didn't build it according to these specs. The only thing they did when they came back in 70 years later was they built the altar to the specs that Ezekiel gave. So the temple that Yeshua came to had the same size altar, which I thought that was real interesting. And we're going to see in a few minutes that there's some Hebrew words that are kind of play on this altar within this text that kind of hint to Yeshua. Also, there was a really cool midrash that says that when Ezekiel was given this information, that he said to the Lord, what's the point? It's futile for us to see this when we're in captivity.
Right.
And the Lord told Ezekiel, okay, is the midrash. He was midrashed as to saying, I don't want to say he actually said it because you can't find that in scripture, but it is a midrash that he said, but if they study it, as if they had built it.
Yes.
So
which that is
scriptural,
and that is a common midrash. That's the same thing with the temple gone. So if you study it and guard them, even though you can't do them, it's as if you did.
Right. That's why Paul can say that our prayers are like our sacrifices and other parts of the temple or the tabernacle, because it's as if we're doing them because we hold it important first. First, we have to admit that it's relevant. If we don't admit that it's relevant, then it doesn't matter what you do or say. Torah's not at the heart. First, you have to admit that it's relevant. Then you can see how your everyday walk really is building the temple. Someday, we're going to be in New Jerusalem, and we're going to see, wow, we did build all this.
Yeah.
All right, so verses 13 to 17 are all about the dimensions of the slaughter place, the altar that's on in the outer court. Okay, and I want to talk about something kind of cool. It's in 15. It says, and the slaughter place hearth is 4 cubits high and 4 horns extending upward from the hearth. Okay, so this is the top.
Right.
And what's interesting about that word hearth is that they don't exactly know what it means, but if you take the Hebrew is ha-ariel, Ariel. It looks like Ariel.
Like flyover Ariel.
That's what it looks like. Ha-ariel, which means the Lion of God.
Hello, Chronicles of Narnia.
Yeah, really. I didn't think about that. What I thought about was Revelation 5.
Sorry, my bad.
I didn't think about Chronicles of Narnia. But Revelation 5, 5, and 6, here's what it says. And one of the elders said to me, do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, overcame to open the scroll and to loosen its 7 seals. And I looked and I saw in the midst of the throne and the 4 living creatures and in the midst of the elders a lamb standing as having been slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of Elohim. So I thought, oh, here we go. We have the lion and the lamb in one verse because he was the sacrifice. That's why it's the lamb as he's been slain.
Right.
And it's kind of a play on words there that if you really dig, you can see that the slaughter place, the Lamb of God, is where they're going to do all of their sacrifices.
Right.
And this is in the millennium. I just thought that was really neat because he will be there.
Right.
And then we have 19 to 27, and it talks about the offerings that should be given for 7 days and up until the 8th day when they're going to, at that point, accept all of them. So this is right along with Exodus, right? Because when Aaron and his sons were inaugurated, I guess you could say, this is what they did for 7 days, right? So the sin offering,
which I think is very significant, that it's 7 days, not just because it's a week. That is good. And on the 8th day, it starts something new. But if you think of it as each one of those representing a millennium, we have, is that where you're going?
No, but that's,
we have where for each millennium, that has to be done again.
Yes.
Now,
another
remember with
offering,
Messiah, as we know in Hebrews, he says he doesn't have to just for once and all.
Right. Because it's for the heavenlies.
Right. Exactly.
It
doesn't change the fact that after he did for the heavenlies, you still had to have him for each millennium. So I see it kind of like creation. Each event happening on a day is significant as a millennium. Here you have that too, and of course you would have it here because you've got to tie those two together.
Well, right, and because what just happened with Israel? They just had the great Exodus out of Egypt. This is going to come when there's the great exodus out of the world.
Yeah.
Right, and returning back to Israel.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I meant, like the great worldly exodus that's on a worldwide scale instead of just, 6 million people out of Egypt. It'll be a lot bigger than that.
Yeah.
I hope. All right, so there were 2 different sin offerings that he wants them to bring. The first day, he wants them to bring a bull.
Okay.
And that usually represents the sin of the high priest or the sin of the nation, including the high priest.
Right.
So it has to have the priest involved in that sin.
Now, is that only the high priest or any priest?
Well, I don't know. It said the high priest in what I had learned. But if it included the entire nation and the high priest, then it would be a bull that had to be, it's burned outside of the camp, and then the blood is brought into the incense altar on the inside to atone for the high priest. I guess because that's about going into the Holy of Holies. I mean, it's between...
Yeah, it's just the blood that's put in there.
Yeah, just the blood.
On the horns.
On the horns, right. And not on the slaughter place. But in this instance, it's put on the 4 horns of the slaughter place. And in the one when they inaugurate Aaron, is also put on the horn. So I saw
some of the things that we see in this week's Torah portion are only a one-time thing. Like the blood around the door for Passover, it only happened there. Here, this inauguration is only one time.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen with each priest.
High priest.
This is bringing, because it makes the clothes... So
it's starting the whole thing.
Correct.
That's why it happens again in the millennium, because now Yeshua is here and it's starting it again. That's my point. That's where I'm going here. Yeah. Is that it happened in the Exodus account, and we see that it happens right here. But there's another reason why I think that it's not brought into the inside, it's done on the outside, because in the Exodus account, the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle that even Moses couldn't enter. Right. So they did it on the outside. Well, in Ezekiel, you see the same thing. The glory of the Lord fills the temple that no one can enter inside. So they put it on the outside, because the outside slaughter place has to be atoned for.
Right.
Because that's us. Right. That represents us. So first they do the bull for the priest, and then it's a goat. And then there's specific sacrifices that they were to bring every single day after that for 7 days. And then on the 8th day, it's ready for the new beginnings for all of it. Now, let's talk about why do we need sacrifices in the millennium if Yeshua's there?
That's what I'm saying. And realize this is in the millennium. Right. This is not back in Exodus or before Messiah. This is after Messiah, and he's even come again.
He's here, and he's bringing sacrifices.
Right.
So what is that all about? Understand that in the millennium, there's still a separation between Yahweh and the people.
Right.
Yeshua's here, and he's
ruling.
In his kingly role. He's not in his priestly role anymore. He's not in that role to go between. He's in his ruling role. Say that 5 times fast.
He's with a rod.
Yes.
Ruling role with a rod.
With a rod of iron. So we know that there still needs to be that insulation between the people and Yahweh.
Right, because they're going to draw near on the earthly, whereas others are drawing near in the heavenlies.
Right. There will be people during the millennium in New Jerusalem. We totally believe that.
Well, hello.
And they will be with the Father. But the ones that are still here, there still is that separation between them and Yahweh.
And here's another great example that we are acting in a heavenly priestly role, because Revelation 3 talks about, for Philadelphia, they're brought into where? The dwelling place. Yeah. Well, you can't be brought into the dwelling place unless you're in the priestly role. Right. You have to be. So where it's not the priestly role of Aaron. That's for earth.
That's for the earthly. But for the heavenlies, Yeshua is the priest there, the high priest there, and he's our Savior. That's how we're brought in.
And not everyone's going to be invited in there. You have to have been in that priestly role with the proper garment, behaving properly, doing what you're supposed to be doing. Right. Okay. And then you get to go in you're a pillar in the dwelling place.
Right. And what is the point? What is the whole purpose of the millennium? Yeshua is going to be here ruling and teaching
from the mountain.
From the mountain. So this is for all of the ones who don't know any better, really, and they are learning it so they can one day go into New Jerusalem at the end when it comes down.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're going to be on the outside. We know from Revelation, we talked about that last week.
Revelation
we know
21 and 20, both of them
right,
talk about
that there
it.
are people on the outside that aren't allowed to come into the city.
Right.
And I would...
And not only that, they don't even get the light from the city. I mean,
They'll still have the sun and the moon. And,
well, they just don't have the same experience. I guess that's the best way to do it. But if you think about it, if those who are in the city are clothed in light,
yeah,
and those who are outside, I mean, how would they even survive inside?
right, yeah.
Could they survive inside?
Well, no, we talked about that last week. They can't walk on the
That's
goals.
right. They can't walk on it. That's right. I mean, literally,
Yeah.
they're like, no thanks. I don't want to go there.
Right. So the key is Torah at the heart.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, if we're the temple and my body acts as a small temple, part of a bigger temple,
right.
Then Torah has to be written on the heart.
Right.
Or we're worshiping at the wrong temple.
Wouldn't that be the gold part? Gold touches gold. Wouldn't that be the Torah what allows it to connect? Because if spirit testifies to spirit, Torah's testify. We know this. Everything has to be
Lined
found
up,
in
right.
Torah. So if my Torah, your Torah, all lines up, of course we can connect.
Yeah,
But
you
when
ever-
someone doesn't have that Torah, that brick, that stone just doesn't quite jive.
And then it's just...
Yeah, or
A
it
lot
just
of
falls
strife.
out.
Yeah.
It just literally gets pushed out of the wall of the actual building, the spiritual temple.
Oh, yeah. Or it gets burned up when
Yeah.
the spirit,
Right, because it wasn't stone.
Right. All right, now we notice in 27 it says, "And when these days are completed, it shall be on the 8th day and thereafter that the priests make your ascending offering and your peace offering on the slaughter place, and I shall accept you, declares the Master Yahweh." This is different than "I shall accept your sacrifice." It's now "I shall accept you." I mean, that is a millennial promise. That is the promise that we have to the Lord when we bring our sacrifices to the correct altar at the correct temple. I'm telling you, there's a lot of temple. I learned this last week that the temple that Israel had mimicked all of the other, it didn't mimic, it mimicked the heavenlies, okay? But all of the paganistic temples, their design and layout looked almost identical to this temple. Why? Because the enemy knew what that looked like, and he is always trying to counterfeit and copy
wants to
the
usurp.
original and usurp. So I say that to say this. When we are coming to the temple of the Lord and we are bringing the sacrifices and we are doing what we can to walk out our salvation, we've got to make sure we go to the temple where Torah is the center. If Torah is not at the center, we're at the wrong temple. And you'll know it by their fruit, right?
Right.
Is everything they're doing from the pagan nations? That would be their fruit. Or is what they're doing from the Torah?
Right.
Because you can only do
What
what's
does it
in the heart.
reflect? You can only reflect the light in which you're absorbing.
That's right. That's right. Out of the abundance of the mouth, the heart speaks, right?
Yeah,
So
that's
if the
a
heart,
scary one.
yes. So if you're not hearing Torah and the importance of Torah at the temple that you choose to worship at, then I would say you're at the wrong temple. I don't know what else. I don't know how else to take it.
Yeah.
Because it was at the beginning and it's at the end.
If you go to Deuteronomy 13, it says, here are
That's the
your two
test.
rules. Doesn't line up with Torah. Yay. No. Go.
Yeah.
So
Anyway.
it's a process and,
And
it's
it
a
is
journey.
a process, and it is a journey. That's exactly right. And it doesn't mean that anyone who's not doing exactly what Torah says is a paganistic temple.
No.
I just mean,
It's
is it the heart? Is it at the heart? Because a lot of times, while the Word of God was at our heart, we didn't understand the importance of all of the things that you find in the Torah, but we knew they were important.
But when we
How about
found
that?
out they were important,
Yes.
we grasped onto it.
That's the difference.
Versus when you find out it's important and you go, I don't think so.
Right. The difference
Then
between...
you can't have spirit testifying to spirit if one says no thank you.
Right. And the difference between the temple of Yahweh and the paganistic temples was in the Holy of Holies, their inner was an idol.
Right.
To whereas, which is why we'll see at the golden calf
And if I'm
that they
correct-
could not.
Well, I guess this is a question.
Okay.
When it was in their Holy of Holies, it wasn't blocked off where no one could go in.
I don't think it was.
No, I want to say, I'm almost positive it was not. They did not have the chamber that you cannot go into.
Yeah, maybe that's why.
Because they had the statue and they brought things to their feet.
their statue, right,
Everyone
right.
was able to do
But
that.
it was still
set up,
fashioned
right.
the same way.
Yeah, you go further back in. But it
Right.
didn't have that block. There was,
Right.
It welcomed all who wanted to because they didn't care if you were with multiples.
Yeah,
you
and-
couldn't pollute that idol by
Right.
bringing another one. He's like, hey, my buddy, how you
Right.
doing? High five.
Yeah.
There was no jealousy.
And
there.
think about that with the Lord's. Everyone has a purpose and a place, and out of a humble spirit, you wouldn't dare go into the Holy of Holies.
Right.
But how boldly you want to come before these idols.
Yeah.
You know, not understanding that.
And you bring them whatever you want
right.
to. You can bring whatever. You can bring food. You can bring them flour. You bring whatever you want to bring.
Right.
Not here.
Right. It has to be His way.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, well, that's all I have for you today. We will see you next week with episode 87. I know, we're moving up.
We're going to be at 3 digits before we know it.
I know. Remember we talked about that.
Yeah,
we're
we
going
have
to
to
have
have a party.
or something.
Yeah.
Ooh, some balloons. Great minds think alike.
Okay.
All right, we'll see you next week. We hope you have a fantastic week.
Shalom.